see it on your end?
Hi, how are you, Russell? Look at the fancy signs nameplates we have. Oh, good for you. Oh, yeah,
It's the winds.
allergies.
And all of that has been affecting it.
Yeah, the winds can really do a number on it, that's for sure.
David, right? Oh, Philip.
Hi,
Sorry.
Philip.
Oh, that's right.
How are you?
Wonderful. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. I don't have a name tag here, but I'm Janice, just in case you forgot. Howdy. Just sit right here.
How official.
I like it.
Sign
location. I like it.
We're bona fide now, as they
Yeah,
say.
very official.
Oh,
How are you,
official.
Ray?
Stuck.
Good. Glad to hear that.
US Bank, that's right. And your offices. Oh, crazy. Southwest corner? Yeah.
Anything new?
Southeast corner.
Good. Yes.
Sorry to hear that.
Just finishing up dealing with my son and his hospital trips, and now I'm dealing with my dad and his hospital trips.
Oh, no. Sorry to hear that. That's hard. That's really hard. Hope everything is kind of routine, but I doubt if it is, if he's going to the hospital these days.
No,
Oh, no.
one of his neighbors found him in the street with a gash on his head. Skull fracture and 2 broken vertebrae.
Is this your dad?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. What happened?
Well,
That's a good question.
that's a good question. He either tripped and fell and is still dinghy from the fall, or he had a stroke and fell because he has no idea.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
no. Oh,
How
no.
old is he? Hold still for the stroke examination. Oh, yeah. That's a tough situation. How old is he? 97.
Wow. That's impressive.
And he insists on living
Hello.
alone
How are you?
100 miles
Doing good. How are you?
Where's that?
You're David?
Oceanside.
Janice?
Oh my goodness, how hard for you with being so far.
Where does he live? I'm sorry.
Oceanside.
That is pretty far. That's tough. Where does your son live?
My son lives with me.
Oh, good. Okay, so that wasn't far. When
No,
you-
no, that's just.
And that crisis is over?
It's getting there.
Okay, well, nice. Nuts. That's just nuts. Well, I hope this meeting finds you guys all in good health
Yes, thank you. Doing well, thank you, yes.
and property free of damage from the last couple days.
Well, I fixed it, but it was, I rebuilt the fence on Sunday. Oh, did you?
Oh my gosh, well that,
I
that's
got my
big,
scars
good
to
for
prove
you.
it. Just part of it. Yeah, part of the back section of my, back fence was between me and my neighbor was just knocked down,
Fences for you.
so, yeah.
We had just finished a week of
Yep,
tree
pretend I
pruning
didn't call.
with our pruners
Nice.
on Friday. In fact, I texted the first thing in the morning, they came out from Rialto, and I said, there's a wind warning, and this sounds really serious. You might want to get here a
join
little
you?
early so you don't have to be driving back home in the wind. They
Should
go,
I
"Boy,
join the meeting? or
you're
sign
right."
up?
It was crazy.
Oh, that's IT.
Howdy? Good, how are you doing?
Doing well. I just wanted to give you guys a microphone demonstration once again.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You do have to be pretty close to the actual mic to get sound to pick up. You can't hear yourself in the room. They can't hear you on camera either. So you want to talk pretty close. You'll see you can hear my voice.
Yes.
That's what you want to hear when you're talking. Okay?
And I've watched these enough to know it's really frustrating when you're watching and you can see the lips going, but it's and with the masks, it makes it a little bit more difficult, so.
So we should be what, 6 or 8 inches from it, or?
No, it's pretty close.
You gotta be right up to
Oh,
it.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and try it out and see, put your face up to it.
The
Testing. Testing.
wireless ones have a little
Yeah, I can't hear that.
hot, and the red one
Testing, 1, 2, 3. See, you can hear the echo?
Yeah. So there's a button to turn it on, or is it just on?
you can actually toggle the mute. It's on here. It's a switch on top.
Okay.
Decide to mute yourself, just make sure to remember to unmute it.
Oh, I see, so it's muted now.
Actually, no, now it's muted. Now
Okay, all right.
yeah.
So I was talking to some guys this morning, and they were at Upland Hills Country Club helping clean up. One of them said
Can I
they lost something
go
like
like that?
400 trees.
I'm not surprised I had a
Perfect.
appointment that's
Let's
right
do
next
that.
to it. And then I walked my dog into the
Ahead of when I say?
and walked around Upland Hills, and I was flabbergasted.
And you'll-
I was
I'll tell them or you'll tell me?
flabbergasted by the amount of debris I saw, of people that were
Got
helping.
it.
It was amazing.
A lot of people
Okay,
have come
very
out,
good.
you know.
Uh-huh.
I guess it's gonna be closed for several, like 3 weeks or something, just cleaning up the debris on the golf course and the green.
Yeah, wow. This is gonna take some time to recover, and I'm really glad that the city's gonna be, well, they declared a state of emergency today.
Today.
Yeah, so we'll be ratifying it on Monday, and as soon as I'll get a change in my doctor's appointment, so I can leave it for that.
So does the state then, have to, are they the ones that allocate the assistance, or is it federal?
Well, I don't know if it's federal, state, I read it was for the purpose of the state, but I don't know if we've got, FEMA involved in this situation or not. I don't know. Is Mike going to be here?
I don't think so.
Okay.
At least he was meeting with Bob when I left.
The city of Upland did a good job of getting. Oh, incredible. I mean, Euclid was clear.
It was, people were working their tails off all over. Contractors came out for, but the big difference that I noticed was from in the mass was the fire department was out there en masse. I mean, they got firefighters from all over there with chainsaws cutting up the trees that were laying in the streets and things. It was amazing.
Some of those old trees are just tipped over. There's no way to save those.
No.
Really
Right on
old
the
ones.
corner where I was
That's
at.
so sad.
It's so sad because we had two problems. We had the wind, but we've got a drought.
That is,
And
yeah.
if you've got a tree planted in the lawn, their roots not gonna grow deep because all the water is right there in the lawn. And so when they get a wind, it just knocks them right over.
Is this on? Yeah, it is. He asked for a 30-second countdown to go live, so let me know when, and I'll tell Brian through the microphone. When you're ready to go live.
You are Kevin. Hi, Kevin. How are you? And Janice. And you're the one that's involved with Habitat for Humanity, is that correct?
Right.
Cool.
So I'm gonna try sharing my screen so people at home can see the packet without having to have logged on. Hopefully. It is. There is no one who asked to call in, and it doesn't look like anyone's gonna ask to speak from here. But anyone's entitled to come, or let the clerk know ahead of time that they would like to speak in oral comments.
True for all committees?
Yeah, there's one exception. The library board is open to the public, but is not being live streamed. We'll begin in 30 seconds. Are you able to show Brian the video of this room until I share my screen? I guess we guessed 30 seconds. It's primarily this one right here. Yeah, so whenever you want to make a point, you just go like this, turn towards the camera. I think we can assume we're live.
Okay.
Although we don't have video.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting being held on January 26th at the Carnegie Building. Let's call this meeting to order, and let's begin with roll call. Want me to call, or do you want to call? Okay, we'll start with Kevin Webb.
Here.
And Philip Tetters. Did I pronounce your name right? Peters, I'm so sorry. Russell Moore. And David Lee.
Present.
Councilman Carlos Garcia.
Present.
And Treasurer Gregory Bradley.
Present.
And myself, Janice Elliott. And I'm glad everybody is here. Have we got any oral communications?
There are no oral communications.
And since he wasn't on the roll call, this is our Assistant City Manager, Stephen Parker.
Thank you.
And welcome everybody to this meeting. Okay, Stephen, I will let you take over at this point.
Very good. Just as a reminder for everyone in the room, if we're not really close, pretending we're intimate with these microphones, then the people watching at home won't be able to hear us. So just keep that in mind, and I'll try to do hand signals to indicate that as well. I'm going to share my screen so that those at home can see what was in the agenda packet as I talk through it. There we go. So the first item for Finance Committee's consideration today is a sales tax update for the third quarter of 2021. That's the period of July through September of 2021, which would be the first quarter of our fiscal year. And this is provided by HDL, the city's sales tax consultants. It's public information. They provide more in-depth information to staff that is not available to be shared publicly. But I wanted to give a little insight from them as to where the city is standing from a sales tax perspective. So first, I'll note, see if that cursor is available for the public. Great. So we see $4.5 million came in sales tax for the third quarter. That is up 15.4% from the same period the year prior. That year prior was in the pandemic, but this is even higher than we were in 2019 third quarter. So it is a complete recovery from any regression that we saw during the pandemic, which is very exciting to see. It's a lot faster than pretty much everybody predicted would happen from a sales tax perspective. You see, the county was actually up over 20% year over year. And some of that reason is because there are other cities within the county who have Amazon warehouses. And something changed in the last year where if you have a city that has an Amazon warehouse, it used to go, the sales tax proceeds used to go into the county pool and be distributed among all of the members in the same percentage that those members have sales tax as compared to one another. A year ago, it changed where Amazon could declare the point of sale as the city that they were in directly, and that city received the benefit. So prior, they would have gotten a higher share because of that Amazon activity of the county pool, but now they're actually getting all of that Amazon activity. The city of Rialto comes to mind as one that has a big facility, and if you were looking at their public sales tax update, I assume that they would be beyond 30%, maybe even beyond 50% or 100%. It's a dramatic shift. That's why the county is higher than the city, or one of the reasons. There's plenty of reasons. You see statewide was a little bit higher than the city as well. What I was told today in the sales tax update from HDL was one of the reasons why the city of Upland is not quite as high as other jurisdictions is because we weren't quite as low as other jurisdictions in the pandemic. So we didn't suffer quite as many losses with our split of tax base as others. And so the ones that experienced the worst of it will actually see the highest of the increases now. As you see further down, it breaks down the year-over-year comparison in light green versus dark green. And so you see most of the different areas are higher. Autos and transportation a little lower. County and state pool is a little lower because of that Amazon situation. A lot of money went out of the county pools and then directly to those jurisdictions. But the county pool still saw growth. Otherwise, that the drop would be dramatic. But it's only slightly lower, and food and drugs is also slightly lower.
How do I get volume?
Can you say that again? Oh, I believe that's Londa. Londa, if you can hear me, can you mute yourself unless you're wanting to speak to the group? Yes, that is her. A female voice from the great beyond. I wasn't sure what to do with it, but cracked that code. So the other information.
Hold on.
Let me text her. Oh, you know what? I have the power to mute myself. Let me just do that. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay. So the other information in here includes, well, never mind, back up here. Building and construction is the most significant of the different industry groups that we have seen a positive increase. If you see down in the report here, that was a 37% increase year over year. There's been a lot of building and development, but really this relates to one primary group. I'm not actually allowed to say any specifics, but if you've been paying attention with what's going on in the city council has approved something in the last year that relates to this increase. And that's a very positive thing for the city and the city's revenues. If you'll notice, gas is higher than it used to be in the past. And that's a big reason that up to $4.50 a gallon spike is a big reason why we're seeing the fuel and service stations increase so dramatically there. And casual restaurants also improved by 39% compared to last year. A lot of eateries were closed at the time and aren't now. And there were several store openings that helped contribute to a 15% increase in the general consumer good area. Let me go back up and show that. So that increase here. Some family apparel stores. I know there was an Old Navy that wasn't there the year prior. If you look on here, the top 25, you'll see Marshalls and Ross, Nordstrom Rack, those types of stores did very strongly in this quarter. And speaking of that top 25, these are, we're not allowed to tell you which one's number 1 or 2, but we are allowed to share who the top 25 sales tax generating vendors are in the city. And there isn't a dramatic change in here from the prior quarter. There's a couple of ones that have shifted up or down, but that gives you an idea of where the biggest drivers of the city's sales tax are. Going to the statewide results. Well, you know what? I'm going to skip the statewide results because we generally have an idea of what's been happening statewide. And as you saw up top, they were up 18.3%. I'll just say briefly down here where we see the change. You see service stations were up 50% statewide. Casual dining up 68% statewide. That really shows you the closures from before. And let me do one more mute. There we go. And fast casual restaurants were even up as well. The only ones that were down, grocery stores, there was a big spike in the prior year, and convenience stores, liquor, but both of those were very slightly down. So all in all, the city's sales tax is very strong. There's a lot of effort that went in from the federal side and the city side and the county side to strengthen those retailers during the pandemic, and not without some loss, of course, but I think a big part of it was as your consumption on vacations and the like, other services weren't happening. It shifted onto this side. But the projections that we've seen from HDL into the future are not for a drop as those service spending increases, but rather that this is a new normal and there's going to be slow but steady growth from here. Are there any questions from the committee on anything that I presented here before I go to the next item?
Anybody?
All right, very good. The second item we have is a fiscal year 22-23 budget update. And this is very brief, but just wanted to give an idea, and I'm going to go to the calendar. Wanted to give an idea of what it looks like. It is a very thorough process that the city goes through. It takes quite some time. The finance department actually starts in December and provides information to the departments in order to help them determine what salary splits. So if a certain position might be charged to different areas, if that needs to change. and gives financial information so that the different departments can begin working on what they're anticipating for the next year. Our city manager, Mr. Belay, informed on January 10th in our budget kickoff meeting the different departments that we were working with a status quo budget for this upcoming year. Even though we are in the black, it's by a couple of $100,000. It's nothing dramatic. And if there were increases that needed to take place, that the departments would need to show that there's an offsetting revenue to explain it, or maybe a contract is stepping up, and so you would have to show the support for that, or other reasons. That doesn't mean that there won't be increases, but the general default is going to be zero, and the department heads would have to convince the city manager that anything increased would be appropriate. Those first numbers are due to the finance department on February 10th. So in just a couple of weeks, the first round of numbers will be submitted to finance. If there were requests for reclassification or new positions, those would be submitted by, it was actually 2 days ago. And then human resources would look at the requests and the appropriateness of anything in there before that would go to finance. And no requests will be automatically put in the budget. They would all be reviewed by the city manager before potential being put in the budget. The numbers that are going by February 10th are also going to be projecting the current fiscal year. We do a mid-year budget update, the first meeting in March. And so those projections for the current year at the same time that you're looking at what next year looks like will be used to come back to council and request a budget adjustment. It's amazing. You start this process, 6 months before a fiscal year ends, and none of us are perfect at predicting the future. So it's a constant evaluation of what kind of tweaks are needed. Sometimes initiatives come up that weren't known at the beginning. So in the first meeting in March, there'll be a mid-year budget where we'll make some tweaks, sometimes on the revenue and expense sides. And ideally, the revenue can offset any expenditure increase. Oftentimes, expenditure increase can be shifted with expenditure decrease where an initiative didn't take place that we thought it would. But so that's coming up the first meeting in March. Meanwhile, the Finance Department will be working in February and March on the first draft of the budget summaries. It'll go the week of March 14th to 17th is when the departments will be meeting with myself, the city manager, and the Finance Department to go through what the requests were, line by line, and support any changes in there. If approved by the city manager, then they would, any modifications there would go back to the Finance Department for a second draft. And then that would be being prepared while they're working on the budget document itself. The new item that we have in this year that we haven't done in the past is we'll actually be coming to this body in the regular meeting in April with a first look. It's not going to be quite as in-depth as the actual budget workshop that'll be going May 9th, my wife's birthday, to the city council for the budget workshop, but it will be a preview and give an idea of where things are changing and why, and what initiatives are being requested in that budget. If that workshop on the 9th is supported by council, then we'll just begin finalizing the budget document. If council has requested modifications on the 9th, then we do have the 23rd as a second potential workshop day to be able to make those tweaks, modifications, and present back to council before the potential first adoption on June 13th. We do have a fail-safe of June 27th if things don't go well, but last year we were able to do June 13th, and it would be our goal to be able to pull that off with a little bit of buffer to spare as well this upcoming year. So the real change in the process from how it's been before, I guess internally, I can tell you instead of presenting information on an Excel worksheet, we're going to be entering it into our ERP, into Munis directly so that we can pull that up easily rather than going to a separate document. That's an internal change. And the external change is coming to this body with a preview before we go to the actual first workshop to council in May. And that was at the request of Chair Elliott for last year. So if you like that, you can thank her. And if you don't, then you can keep it to yourself. Are there any questions on the budget process?
I'm just curious with the recent wind damage, do those costs impact the budgeting process for having something like that hit and seeing like our public works department out there in force and whatnot?
Yeah.
How do you handle things like that? Or is that a different bucket?
Fortunately, it doesn't come up frequently.
Yeah.
But yeah, it absolutely will affect that the work of dealing with the cleanup has to take place. And that's something that was not budgeted. The city does have an emergency fund that it could dip into. But because this isn't at the catastrophic scale of an earthquake with city buildings destroyed or something along those lines, our approach is going to be to take the additional contracts with our arborist, with our lighting vendor, our streetlight vendor, overtime, all these extra costs and get the work done that needs to get done, and then figure out how it affects the budget. So the timing is actually beneficial in that we'll kind of have a really good idea within a couple of weeks of what the true costs were. As Council Member Elliott said, maybe before we went live, a state of emergency was declared by our city manager today. And council will have a special session on Monday to ratify that. There is a potential of getting reimbursed for some of those expenses through the Office of Emergency Management with the state of California. And that would be the purpose of declaring that emergency, with the attempt to be able to recoup some of that. I can't guarantee any percentage of that will happen. But it's prudent government trying to do its best to recoup those costs. Whether we are or are not, there will be, because we will not get 100% recouped, guaranteed. We will have a budget adjustment in that mid-year budget that I mentioned. We will be having tweaks as it relates to that. Ideally, we'll have some other areas where we didn't spend money that can offset it, or perhaps additional revenues where it won't be an increase overall to the budget, but we will have to make budget adjustments for that. And what Mr. Blay has expressed to the staff is make sure we get done what needs to get done as soon as possible, and then we'll figure it out from the money side when we find out if we can get emergency grants for it, or if we need to figure it out in-house.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for a very informative presentation. I'm very happy to see that this committee will be reviewing the initial rollout of the budget, because we're going to have some expert eyes from the community on this. So I'm very excited about this change. Okay, the next item.
Very good. So the next is another informational item. So we don't have major initiatives for Finance Committee to consider today, but we have been busy in the last year, so I'm sure you'll be okay with the break. And one of the things we've been busy with is the BLAST UAL strategy. I wanted to give an update. Since we last met, there was, with the recommendation from this body, a workshop went to City Council for consideration. That was November 15th. And based on the feedback from that, we moved forward with a business item for Council's consideration on December 13th. And let's see if I can pull up. This all relates to our pension liability and trying to address it. Many people say the city needs to do something to address it, and we've been pursuing this quite aggressively and intentionally for a year and a half. But really, council has been cognizant of it and making moves with that intent since 2016, when you see on the staff report, they established a 115 trust and began funding it. Also in that bargaining process, having the safety employees pick up 3% of the city's normal cost. And then in 2020, miscellaneous employees picked up 1.4% of the city's normal cost. Those are some gives by our city employees to help in that process. And I think you'll find, if you compare with other cities, that we're on the one side of that. We're on the forefront of getting help from the employees that are receiving those pension benefits. But here's the list at the top of this screen of the actions that were approved relating to the BLAST UAL strategy on December 13th. That was authorizing the transfer of $10 million from the city's Section 115 pension trust to CalPERS. It was authorizing a $15.3 million additional discretionary payment to CalPERS to pay off our 3 enterprise funds' share of the city's overall UAL. It was approving a revised pension funding policy. What that revision did was say that whenever there is budgetary savings as a result of making an additional discretionary payment to CalPERS, that 50% of those budgetary savings will go right back into the Section 115 trust. Instead of being available to spend for something else, you apportion out 50% of that and put it into the trust for more availability in the future. That was approved on the 13th. There was also, I didn't put it on here, there was a revision to our investment policy that authorized an exception to the 5-year investment rule, and that will allow the general fund to issue lease revenue bonds that would be internally considered only. You'll remember this from the BLAST presentation, where the water and sewer funds would make a purchase of that, a legal way of providing the general fund with funds to be able to then remit to CalPERS and pay down their loans. The enterprise funds would be made whole over the course of the borrowing. And what our intention is to line that up exactly with the issuance of the 2022 water bonds. That's $15 million in water bonds. And that's part of what my update is here today, is the progress on that. But whatever the water bonds, when we go to the open market, are issued for, is what our internal borrowing rate would be as well, to ensure that the enterprise funds are made whole and the general fund gets a very beneficial tax-exempt rate to pay off PERS liability. I think that's all of the items that were approved on the 13th. So now let me give you a little update as to the progress that's taken place since then. The city staff met with the financing team. That financing team was established. Actually, Treasurer Bradley and I were in on all of the requests for proposal for all the elements of the financing team. We had help from other people throughout the process, but the two of us were on each of those. We had excellent rates. If we were going to issue pension obligation bonds, we had very low costs and very high quality vendors that we were going to be working with. As it turned out, thanks to litigation, we were not able to pursue pension obligation bonds, but in the shift to this BLAST UAL strategy, we did a much smaller lease revenue bond issuance, or we're in the process of doing that for the water bonds. Well, we were able to retain that same excellent team, that financing team, as a part of the process. So that consists of Stradling, Yaka, Carlson, and Roth as our disclosure counsel, Best and Krieger as our bond counsel, Urban Futures as our municipal advisor, and JP Morgan as our underwriter. Our first meeting was just the same week as council approved the blast on December 13th. And we took a look at interest rates, and there were a few considerations to be made. Let's see if I have any of that. No, I don't think I have any of that in there. So the main issue is, what is the best way of issuing this debt? We were looking at a 20-year open market bond issuance, but there was discussion of having a private placement on a 15-year basis. $15 million is a little high in that private placement world. 15 years is kind of pushing the limits as well as what you would want to do. But there was some initial indication that those rates would be very positively looked at, especially considering what we're coming into is an interest rate rising environment. It's pretty much unanimously agreed that in the coming 3 months, which is the time horizon of issuing those bonds, that interest rates will be rising on the tax exempt market. And so by going to private placement, it would be beneficial from the city's perspective of locking in that rate at the beginning of the process instead of waiting to find out at the end what the market is. So we pivoted from what we originally were thinking of going to the open market and explored private placement. We got quotes the first week of January, formal quotes, and what had happened from when we discussed it originally in December to the first week of January is the private placement market rates went up pretty dramatically. We're talking 15 to 20 basis points. And so what looked like a slam dunk, let's lock that rate in right away and then the city would reap that benefit, turned into, well, if we would have done it 2 weeks ago, it would have been great. But not so sure it makes sense now. So it was the second week of January when the decision of which way should we go is. And I don't think I'm betraying any trust to say the rates that we were looking at were, we could lock in a 191 for a 15-year term with one of the institutions that we were looking at. And the other gave us indicative rates of 183, but said city council would have to give authorization that we were moving forward with the bonds before they would do it. So one bank would let the city manager sign on the city's behalf. And, you know, we had already made council had already made it clear that this is the path they were headed. But the other bank was looking for absolute clear guidance that council was approving moving forward with that. Not knowing what that would be, that would have been yesterday that we would have locked it in if council approved it on the 24th. Comparing that unknown to the 191 known opened up another option. And the other option was, well, if we do go back to the open market, even though we know rates are going to rise, we think they would have to rise by more than 50 basis points in this time horizon in order for it to not make financial sense to do it. So we don't know how much we'll save in the extra work of having to get a bond rating and issue a preliminary official statement, which is what a number of our staff are working on at this moment, and going through that whole process. But we are pretty confident, we are very confident that it will be better than that 191 rate that was offered to us. So I don't want to make predictions, but my guess would be that we'll beat that by at least 20 basis points. And this is, you know, if I could tell you exactly what it would be, I wouldn't be in this job. I'd be doing something that would make a lot more money. But I've been told by JP Morgan, who is our underwriter, your Urban Futures, our financial advisor, and Bob Torres, who we've brought on. He's been a finance director issuing bonds in at least a half dozen different jurisdictions. all are indicating that while there's extra work in it, it's going to be worth it for the city overall. So that is the current place where we are. In order to issue bonds, you need a financing authority. And the financing authority that the city currently has is a joint powers authority between the city and the redevelopment agency. The redevelopment agency is no more, and it got dissolved by the state of California in 2012. And the successor agency to the redevelopment agency is winding down debt. In about 15 years, when that debt is gone, then that joint powers authority won't be able to be used anymore. And even though we're looking at a 15-year horizon instead of the 20, that's another pivot that has happened in this process. Additional savings to the city for paying it off in a faster rate. And we have the debt service coverage to be able to do that in the water fund. So even though we have that change, sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
Can I ask a question
Please do.
regarding the unfunded accrued liability to CalPERS? They charge an annual rate, and that rate is considerably higher, obviously, than the numbers you're talking about, like three or.
Yes.
But it's likely to go down to about 6.8.
It is. Okay. I was curious how often that rate fluctuates, and does a rising rate environment impact that, or is it mainly performance of the portfolio?
Yeah, so the CalPERS rate is static at a period of time. It doesn't float. But it was as high as 8.75 a couple of decades ago. And over time, they've said, no, we don't think that we can actually earn that on a long-term horizon. So they've lowered it over time. Treasurer Bradley just identified it's 7 right now. It'll be 6.8 next fiscal year. And that's because of a policy that CalPERS put into effect, I believe it's 2015, risk mitigation strategy policy. And what they did is said, if at any point CalPERS performance exceeds their 7% assumption by more than 2%, then they're actually going to take that good year when municipalities would gain a benefit and lower the discount rate a little bit. So take some of those savings every year for themselves, which would allow there to be less variation in the future. Basically, you're more likely to get your target if it's 6.8 than if it's 7. And they also would be investing in less risky assets as well. I think it would only be, if it was 2% higher, it was going to be 5 basis points that it would drop. But because their performance this last year exceeded 21%, according to the threshold that they came up with, it actually called for a 20 basis point drop. So even though we know it's going to be 6.8 in the future, it is 7% right now. And it is 6.8 into the future until they have another year of performance that exceeds 9%. And then it'll inch down depending on how successful their performance is. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. A 20 basis point drop on 127 million is huge. And as I read this, I guess with these remittances you're talking about, another $25.3 million in paydowns will occur on that, so it'll be closer to 100 million when the remittances are completed, right?
Yes, and they were completed in the month of December.
Oh, they were, okay.
Yes.
Things are
So-
moving in the right direction there.
Absolutely. And if you'll remember from the blast strategy presentation, we're anticipating all the moves combined by the time at the end of March, maybe the first meeting of April, when all the moves are combined, that we will have put into place the steps necessary to save the city over $70 million in interest on the UAL. That doesn't mean we're done, but that's a lot to be accomplished in this time horizon.
Stephen, I was under the impression when we had the Zoom meeting with Urban Futures that this was going to be primarily general obligation bonds?
Pension obligation bonds, right?
Well, no, I thought, well, because here we have revenue bonds,
Yeah.
so.
I'm not hearing the echo, so people at home can't
Okay,
hear you.
so here I'm seeing we have these revenue bonds tied to water and to leases.
Mhm.
I'm just trying to remember, it was several months ago. So I'm trying to remember, I thought the rest was going to be just general obligation bonds at like 3.5%.
Yeah, when we were issuing pension, we were considering issuing pension obligation bonds, then they would have been in that realm of rates and in term. When there was litigation and the city was not able to proceed with the issuance, then we had to come up with a pivot. And that pivot was in the form of this Blast UAL strategy, which is multi-factored. The revenue bonds of the water fund, 15 million compared to 120, it's
Right.
very small
So
comparatively.
that's why, so bonds will only be, say, 25%, well, 15% or so of the overall unfunded liability, and the rest will be with the LAST of the blast.
Yes and no. So the 15 million in water bonds is just used for water capital projects. But in combined with the T, the transfer, that allows the water fund, well, I guess it's actually the L in blast. The lease investment, the water fund will invest in the general fund. The general fund then has 15 million from the water fund that was freed up by the water fund issuing those bonds. And then the general fund will spend that $15 million by remitting it to PERS and lowering the UAL. So they'll do an additional discretionary payment, and lower it. It sounds like you weren't at our last meeting when we went through the entire strategy.
I probably wasn't.
Okay.
That's correct.
That meeting is online on Zoom, or what came as a result of that finance committee meeting is we had a workshop with city council on November 15th, and that was on Zoom. I think we went into more detail in the finance committee one, so if I were to just look at one, I would look at the finance committee one to get more information on that, but I'm happy to answer any questions offline or that you have right now on what that strategy is. It is complicated. There are multiple aspects to it, but it's also not risky. It's very, very not risky. If when you're talking about borrowing, the general fund is borrowing. It's borrowing from the water fund at the same rate that the water fund is issuing lease revenue bonds. Well, it's going to be under 2%. And when we're paying off a liability that even in a short period of time is going to go down to 6.8%, 2% is phenomenal. I'd be happy to discuss the pros and cons of issuing debt to pay off a higher liability. But when you're talking about these kinds of spreads, it would take something extraordinarily unprecedented for there to be a negative aspect to the city on that side. And of course, because the rest is coming from our 115 trust, where we've already been putting aside for this purpose, and the enterprise funds who had the reserves to pay off their share, those monies weren't earning as much either. The enterprise funds were earning about 0.5%. And so turning 0.5% into what they're going to get back from the city, less than 2%, but it's still going to be almost 4 times higher. They'll benefit. Plus, they had, like say the water fund, because that's the biggest of our enterprise funds. They had this liability as well. That liability is gone. So there's a much less cash that needs to be going towards paying off that liability in the future. And that means that cash gets to go into what the purpose of it is for, is fixing up our infrastructure.
Okay, thank you.
Even one more question, not to belabor the point.
No.
But the lease revenue bond, what has the city council determined with their outside advisors what asset is going to be sold and leased back?
No, so with the lease revenue bond, there'll be revenues of the water fund that are being utilized. So there won't be the income stream, correct?
Okay, got it.
Now, there is the internal lease bond that will have to have an asset. And right now, I'm getting appraisals on this building that we're in, as well as the other two that are on this site, the library and city hall. I don't think all three of those would be necessary, but some combination of those would be what we'll be proposing to use for that. The nice thing, because it's internal, is, say we did take all three buildings to get to the $20 million in coverage. If in 2 years enough payments have been made to get to where it's only two buildings, we can remove that one from being held. So we control all the aspects of it, and there's flexibility there.
Basically, it's pocket to pocket, right?
Absolutely.
Good.
Yeah. Well, I know I got stuck on something, and you guys have spared me from having to answer it because I've completely forgotten where I was. Does anybody remember where I left off?
I do not remember. Anybody else?
Then we're just going to agree that I could have gone in more depth if I needed to. It might have been relating to Joint Powers Authority. So the city needed to establish a new Joint Powers Authority if it wanted to issue debt beyond 15 years in the future. And so what was done in the first meeting in January was establish a parking authority, actually reestablish. There had been one established in the past, and that's why some of our downtown parking lots are owned by the city now. Reestablish that parking authority. And then in its most recent meeting, council approved a few different steps. That parking authority established bylaws and meeting dates. And the city council and the parking authority board agreed to form a joint powers authority that would be used for financing opportunities into the future. So even though there is an existing joint powers authority between the redevelopment agency and the city, it might even work for this one because we're only looking at 15 years, but it wouldn't work for any potential issuances in the future. So the idea was to establish a new one that could be used forever into the future, and that was done at this last meeting. So the next steps, there we go. I have that on the screen here. The next steps are to have, internally, we're finalizing the first draft of our preliminary official statement. And then we'll be doing a rating presentation. Actually, internally on the 10th, we'll be doing that. There'll be an action item for City Council to consider the issuance of $15 million in water revenue bonds on February 14th. And then internally, we'll be meeting with S&P, the rating provider, and present the information of the water fund. And we anticipate that we will increase the city's rating because the city is in a much better financial situation than it was the last time a rating was had. That was 2011. And we'll see how high. I'm holding out for something in particular, but I don't want to say it on the record in case we don't get there. But regardless, we know that it'll be higher than before. And then the actual sale of the bonds will be, or targeted, I should say, for March 14th and 15th. Then we have all the closing of that is targeted for the 31st. We're hoping to have all of the financial details figured out. So each year is going to be a different interest rate, and we would mimic that interest rate of whatever the open market says the cost of those bonds are. We would mimic that for our internal general fund lease revenue bond, and ideally have documents for that on the 28th. It might be a little too tight, and we might have to go to the first meeting in April for that. But once that's done, then there'll be there's one item not on here, and that's asking council for the authorization of remitting the $20 million that the Water and Sewer Fund invest in the general fund to CalPERS and get those future savings as well. So that's where we've done a lot in a really short period of time. And I commend council. This is creative, but it's safe. And it's really at the forefront of dealing with this big issue that almost every single city is having to deal with. And the intentional moves that are being done now are going to put our residents in a much better situation 10, 15, 20, 25 years into the future. It's hard to overstate how $70 million in interest savings in a 22-year period, you can't do that kind of savings for a city in other ways. So I'm very excited to get to be along for this ride and really appreciative of this finance committee and the support that they've had in that process. I'm happy to answer any questions relating to this item if there's any at this time.
I don't see any questions. I want to reiterate that just this week, I again heard the argument that against pension obligation bonds, that it saddles future generation to a cost that's been incurred in the past. And what I love about this program is it doesn't. It is the length of the bond, the term of the bond is the same as the term of the liability. So that term has been established. There is no additional burden on future generations. So I just appreciate all the efforts that you have contributed to this, Stephen, and the direction that you're going. And unless we have other questions or comments, we can go on to the next item. Councilmember Garcia.
The only comment I have is, again, thanking you, Stephen, and the staff for doing all of this. I echo what Council Chairwoman,
Elliott.
I'm sorry, say it again?
Elliott.
No, I know. I'm thinking way too far ahead, but yeah, Chairman Elliott on this. It's also the fact too that as a council, we are not kicking the can down the road. We're addressing this head on, whatever, growing pains or whatever we have to deal with, we're addressing it now. So in the future, you don't have another council sitting in there kind of going through this whole process all over again.
Yeah, that's a really hard thing for someone who's elected every 4 years to do, is to make a self-sacrificing decision in the present that will benefit long after you're here. I'm just really impressed by this council for being willing to make those tough decisions, because it is truly for the benefit of our city and our residents as opposed to you individually.
So I was just going to ask, are these bonds callable?
There is a 10-year call provision in them, although I don't know in 10 years if you're talking about a rate like 1.75%, how much opportunity there is. But yes, we'll do it like.
I mean, that's always possible, right?
Yep,
you
it is.
Save 25 basis points, you could do it.
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, so we'll be doing a 10-year call provision, as most bonds are.
Okay.
And I just want to add one more comment to what Chair Elliott said, and it isn't saddling the future. The liability already exists, and paying it off in the future already exists. But not only is it not adding, but it's actually decreasing. If we're paying off on a 15-year horizon, and right now we're paying on a 22-year horizon, we're not only is the interest rate 5% lower, but it's over a shorter period of time. Every way around you look at it, it's better. And that's just the 15 million borrowing that we're talking about. Obviously, what's paid out of pocket is a lot faster than a 22-year time horizon for paying off. Okay, with that, should we go to the last item?
Yes, please.
Very good. So the last item tonight is a look at our December 31st portfolio review. I've tried a few different approaches since I've gotten here of having different presentations from different broker-dealers. And as things have been a little crazy lately, trying to effectuate BLAST, I didn't get anyone lined up, and so I thought I'm just going to do this one myself. Today will be the Steven show. There was a request in the past for a quarterly comparison, and so I'm going to go to that page first because I think it does the most. Oh, and now I'm realizing I didn't bring my cheat sheet with me. But here's our quarterly comparison. This is the treasurer's report from September of 2021 as compared to December of 2021. And you'll see some significant changes, but all in all, there isn't actually that much that has changed, or it's very easy, innocuous to describe. So I'm going to start with the bank account. We have $12.2 million less in cash in the bank account. 10 million of that was put into primarily government agency securities, but 10 million of that was remitted to our investment portfolio. 5 million in October, November. No, 5 million in October and 5 million in November was remitted into our investment account so that we could make investments. Another 2.5 million was remitted in December, and this is a part of our general fund reserve policy. Says that 40% of every dollar of net operating of excess at the end of every year will go to our pension fund, and 5% will go to our other post-employment benefit fund, both the 115 trusts. So our end of the year ended so strongly that 40 and 5% resulted in $2.5 million going to CalPERS in the month of December. So the bank account change is just going to investments or going to CalPERS. You see down here, going to the PARS. I'm sorry, I said CalPERS. I should have said PARS, our Section 115 trust. That's where we went. So looking at the PARS balances, you see that the OPEB is up 351. Some of that is performance. Some of that is a couple $100,000, representing the 5% that the general fund reserve policy called for sending over. The $7.6 million drop is made up of the $2.2 million that we remitted for the 40%, as well as $10 million that went to PERS in conjunction with the BLAST strategy. So the pension, any difference there is appreciation in the trust. So that's why the pension trust is lower. What I love is that after remitting $10 million to PARS, from PARS to PERS, we still have $3 million in our 115 trust. And that's the importance of the S in BLAST, the save. You keep putting any excess into your 115 trust so that you have opportunities to utilize it in the future. If we're really lucky and CalPERS makes their discount rate every single year, then we're going to get to do fun things like pay down $10 million at some point in the future. But I'm not holding my breath that happens. CalPERS is going to have poor performance years. And our pension funding policy says in those times, we're going to utilize our PARS 115 trust and pay it off at a faster rate than CalPERS is asking us to. And as we all know, if you pay off a liability faster, you save interest in the process. So that I'm really excited that after remitting 10 million, we have 3 million still available. And in next year, I'm hoping that'll be closer to 5. The other change that you'll see is 18 million in LAIF decreased. And that was $15.3 million that was remitted, representing the enterprise fund's share of the UAL in December. So that was the vast majority of it. And the other 2 million was, let's see, was the 115 trust contribution as well. So the sending over in December representing the benefit that was in the June revenues exceeding expenditures in conjunction with our general fund reserve policy. So if you're looking at the blended yield, we were talking about just 0.5%. 0.5% is all that the city's investment pool has been making. And it went up to 0.66%. I'd love to say that interest rates are rising and that's why we're doing so well, but that's actually not the case. The reason is that we had $45 million in LAIF, which is very liquid and very safe and also very low yielding right now, 22 basis points. So having so much money prudently available, like if we would have not had it, then we would have had to sell an investment in order to remit the enterprise fund's share of the UAL. So you need to have some liquidity. But by decreasing our liquidity and having less than 30 million in LAIF, it actually helped increase our blended yield because these other assets that we're investing are higher yielding. So that's generally what I wanted to talk about, all on this page, but we have right after it the entire treasurer's report, which usually has gone to council, but in this instance, we're going to be going at our next meeting, so this is the first time that any council members would have to see the treasurer's report. It'll be on the February 14th meeting. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have either about the treasurer's report or that comparison page. If there are any.
Any questions? I'd like to comment that I really enjoy having the comparison. Thank you very much. I'd like to be able to compare and I also would like to compare from a fiscal year before too. So because sometimes income is periodic, and so you get a better idea of what was December 2020 compared to December 2021. That may be more than the staff can put together, but I do find this is helpful as well. So thank you.
Very good. The treasurer's report at the end, page 14 to 14, does have a summary, a month by month market value analysis, where you can see that it's small font, but it's there. You can see those numbers on an annual basis. If you like, we'll modify that first page to include the annual as well as the year over year in the future.
Thank you. I did not see that because it is small font and it will not, it keeps changing its layout, so I can't see it.
If you like, you can look behind you. That gets a little idea. It's still small font, even on that big a screen, though. There you go.
Yes. Well, did you have any comments? This is your report, Treasurer.
I've been dealing with health issues with my son and my dad, so I hadn't gone over it yet. So.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Tried to get here early today to do it, but didn't quite make that either.
No worries. Okay.
Mr. Bradley does a very thorough review of the treasurer's report. If you should have a lot of confidence in your treasurer. I can't speak for predecessors because I wasn't here, or at least no predecessor showed up while I was here, I should say. But I'm impressed at how thorough he is, taking and tying every item on there, and you can have the utmost confidence in those numbers. Hopefully just because staff prepared it and you have confidence in us, but if not, then because Treasurer Bradley does a deep dive into it.
Well, for future meetings, I'd like to see if you found the schedule with the comparison helpful. Anybody want to comment on that?
Personally, I really like that. Just as a lender in banking, for many years, we would analyze businesses and look at year-over-year changes, as well as maybe the interim financial statement to the prior year interim financial statement to determine where the variances are. So it's just a quick snapshot to see, okay, where are we trending? And if the trend is, you know, significant changes, then you can go to the line items and look at where they're at.
Thank you.
So I do like that, yes.
And I also would like to see the year over year, because that gives you the ability to kind of see where the benchmark was before and make it really relative numbers.
We'll add that for next time.
Well, do you?
Those are all the items.
Any other items? And I can't remember what day it was. It was on your report.
Yes, let me pull it up. I want to say 26, but let's, no, that's today, huh?
April 28th,
27th, I believe, right? Wednesday?
Wednesday, 28th. According to page 3 of 3 of your
No.
budget.
Well, I'm looking at a calendar. Let's,
Oh, you look at the
let's,
extra calendar. Okay.
let's look at that. I seem to have made an error in the budget.
Okay, no worries.
Very good.
That would be the 27th.
So
Okay.
nice to meet in person.
It is good.
So April
The
20.
last one was too, but I think I was on vacation for our anniversary for that one.
Yeah, we met in the city council and at City Hall, on the dais. Okay, well, this meeting will now be adjourned and we'll see you on the 27th of April. Thank you.
Same time?
Yes, 4 o'clock.